What's going on, guys, and welcome to the online lecture for Performance Nutrition, Chapter 10. Before we get started with today's PowerPoint presentation, I just want to go over some housekeeping stuff. Diet Analysis Part B is due tonight, which is Wednesday, April 15th at 11 p.m. You need to submit that on NYU Classes as a Word document under Assignments. I will be releasing the information for Diet Analysis Part C next week. So just hold tight and I'll give you some information and instructions on Part C with the next lecture. I am still waiting to receive some of your grades for Exam 2. So if you have not already emailed me the correct grade that you're supposed to get for Exam 2, please do that. I have most of them, but I need all of them, and once I have all of them, I will upgrade your grade to make sure it looks correct and is correct in NYU Classes gradebook. So right now, your grade there might not be what you actually received, but I can assure you that it will be correct once I have all of the grades through email, and I will adjust them manually in the Test and Quizzes tab. So, without further ado, we will continue on to Chapter 10, Performance Nutrition, and now we are officially moving in to the final part of our class and moving towards our final exam. So let's see. Pointer. All right. So performance nutrition, aka sports nutrition. This is a topic that many people are interested in and is the reason I got involved in nutrition in the first place. As I explained in my first class, I started out as a personal trainer. And as I learned more about the nutrition required for exercise, it became something that I became more fascinated with than the exercise itself. And that kind of brought me into this field. So our learning objectives with this chapter, we are going to start out by defining and discussing the concept of physical fitness, what it means to be physically fit. Then we're going to review the different types of exercise, looking at resistance training and endurance exercise. From there, we'll move on to the body's 3 energy systems that support muscular work, how we produce energy to keep up with the exercise that we're doing. Then we'll tie nutrition into this by explaining the importance of glucose, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, and fluid to athletes. And then we'll finish off by highlighting several ergogenic aids, which are materials or supplements or anything that is supposed to give somebody a benefit to their performance when it's consumed. So we're going to start out by looking at the relationship between physical activity and nutrition. And we call this really a bidirectional relationship, meaning that physical activity impacts aspects of nutrition, and aspects of nutrition impact our physical activity or our ability to perform exercise. So looking at it one way, the body needs the appropriate fuel for exercise. This includes the energy yielding nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, and fat. But we also need micronutrients to support exercise, vitamins and minerals. Now, these don't provide energy themselves, but they support energy producing pathways and our recovery. Looking at the relationship the other way, physical activity or exercise impacts aspects of nutrition. So our physical activity will influence how energy yielding nutrients are used. Not only will it increase the efficiency of overall metabolism, so we use things more effectively, but also the type of exercise we do is going to dictate the type of fuel we use. So depending on what kind of exercise we're performing, dictated primarily by the intensity of that exercise, is going to determine where if we're using primarily carbohydrate for fuel, fat for fuel, or a good mix of both. And we'll see that later once we move past the energy systems. The last component of this slide, physical activity, is going to increase our daily calorie allowance. So exercising burns calories, and so when it comes to weight maintenance, when we're physical activity, it gives us a little bit more wiggle room in our food choices or our number of meals or snacks. This brings us to physical fitness, and we have two definitions for physical fitness. The first definition, physical fitness, is the ability of the body to withstand mechanical stress of all kinds. But it's also just referring to characteristics that enable us to perform physical activity. And we have four pillars or four characteristics that compose of physical fitness. That's flexibility, muscle strength, muscle endurance, and cardiorespiratory endurance. And we will break these down on the following slide. But this is what it means to be physically fit. If you can have all four of these, is what makes somebody physically fit. Being physically fit is associated with a longer, healthier life. This, of course, is in comparison to those with a sedentary lifestyle or people who don't exercise. And people who do exercise regularly and are physically fit tend to have higher energy levels and lower rates of chronic diseases. When discussing physical fitness or somebody's ability to have these four characteristics, we always must recognize that there are genetic limitations to physical fitness. And I always try to compare myself to LeBron James. And I feel like I've done this in our class before, but I love to play basketball, but no matter how I trained, no matter how many jump shots I took, I'm never going to become, or I was never going to become, LeBron James, and because we have different genetic limitations. So our four pillars of physical fitness, the first one is flexibility, and flexibility is the capacity of joints to move through a full range of motion. So this is where I ask you to put your hands over your head, try to reach them all the way to the sky. Now you're testing the flexibility of your shoulder joints to see how far they can move up. And if you have good flexibility, you'll be able to get them straight up to the ceiling without having to crane your neck or your back. If you have bad flexibility, then you might have to crane your neck or back to get there. And looking from the side, you'll have more than less than 180-degree angle when you're at your full capacity. The second one is muscle strength, and this is something I'm sure we're all familiar with. It's our ability of muscles to overcome physical resistance. So how much can you bench? How much can you squat? Those are measures of muscle strength. We also have muscle endurance. This is the ability of muscle to contract repeatedly within a given time. So how many push-ups can you do in a minute? When you're testing that and you're doing many repetitions, you are testing muscular endurance. And then the last one, cardiorespiratory endurance. So this is the ability of the heart, lungs, and metabolism to sustain intensity. So do you have the cardiorespiratory endurance to run 10 miles? When you're testing the ability of your heart and your lungs to keep up with the intensity, you're testing that cardiorespiratory endurance. Now, when we engage in exercise, we don't use these things in isolation. Usually it's a combination of all of them. So if you think about a bench press or a squat, that's usually a test of your strength and also your flexibility to make sure that you're in the proper position. When we're looking at something like a push-up, as I use with muscular endurance, not only are we testing muscular endurance, but we're also testing our muscular strength. And then with the example of running 10 miles, not only are we going to be testing our cardiorespiratory endurance, but we're also going to be testing our muscular endurance as well. So you don't want to think about these pillars of physical fitness in isolation, but they're things that happen at the same time when we're exercising. Here are some benefits of physical fitness. So research suggests that most people who become physically active can expect these and other benefits. So improved body composition and adipose distribution or fat tissue distribution, improved bone density. So exercise is very good for your bone health, especially resistance training. Enhanced resistance to cold and other infectious diseases. So being physically fit can help you to build your immune system. Lower risks of some types of cancers. I'm not entirely sure which cancers have been connected to physical fitness and which have not, so I can't comment further, but more efficient circulation and stronger lung function. Right, when we engage in exercise, we're testing and pushing our circulation and lung function to the limits, and that helps to build it up. Reduce risk factors for cardiovascular disease, so just improve metabolism, lower body fat, and improved lean muscle, lower risk and improved management of type 2 diabetes. Exercise is an excellent tool helping to manage someone's blood sugar. Reduce risk of gallbladder disease, like the cancer. I can't quite explain the connection here. Lower incidence and reduce severity of mental anxiety or depression. So not only physical benefits, but also mental and psychological benefits. Longer life and higher quality of life in later years. Now, higher quality of life, people who are physically fit in their younger years tend to have better muscle function, improved bone density, and so they're more durable as they age and are able to engage in activities such as walking, maybe hiking, as they get into their later years. Well, since physical activity is so beneficial, we do have physical activity guidelines that are published by the United States government. So the physical activity guidelines for Americans is part of the dietary guidelines for Americans. And of course, we talked about this when we reviewed MyPlate. And we know that MyPlate is the visual representation of the dietary guidelines. Now we're seeing that there's an exercise component. So the government is not just giving recommendations for how we should eat, but also how we should move our bodies. So this is published by the Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture together. Their recommendations include aerobic activity and resistance training. The recommendations vary by time and intensity, and this is what we would have as an inverse relationship. So if you're going to be exercising for a longer period of time, you're going to be doing it at a lower intensity. And if you're going to be exercising for a shorter period of time, you're going to be exercising for a higher intensity. The recommendations they give, or the goals, they're stated as minimum requirements. So it sets the benchmark for what you should do, and doing more is certainly encouraged. And the recommendations are for the general population, and they do not include goals for sports performance. So sports are going to have specific training protocols, exercise requirements that are going to be beyond what is recommended for the general population. So we will see that for the general population, we're recommending a certain amount of aerobic activity. Well, perhaps an Olympic powerlifter, if we consider an Olympic powerlifter, they're not somebody who we're going to be recommending doing 5 days of aerobic activity. Their focus is on improving strength, improving power, and so there's less room or less need to engage in those kinds of activities. So here are our physical activity guidelines for Americans. So we have 4 recommendations here. The first one, every day just choosing an active lifestyle and engaging in flexibility activities. So this one is basically just don't be a couch potato. Just try to be on your feet, walk your dog, take the stairs, stand up, do some stretching. Just get your body moving. It doesn't have to be purposeful exercise, but just engaging in activities that have your body moving. Now, for purposeful exercise, 5 or more days per week, they're asking that we engage in moderate or vigorous aerobic activities. And so the benchmark is a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity, like brisk walking or ballroom dancing. Or it could be 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activities, such as bicycling, jumping rope, or you could do a mix of the two. Below that, we have another specific recommendation for purposeful exercise. This would be 2 or more days per week engaging in strength activities. So muscle strengthening activities. It doesn't have to be weightlifting. It could be calisthenics or body weight activities. Things like yoga, Pilates, bar, you name it. Anything that's challenging the muscles in a way and building strength is recommended 2 or more days per week. And then below this, the final one, similar to the first, just a general recommendation, avoiding inactivity. So just getting your body moving and not being a couch potato. Now you may be curious, they say moderate or vigorous aerobic activities, moderate to high intensity. Well, what exactly does that mean? And it's a good question to ask, right? Because my moderate may be someone else's vigorous. Your moderate may be someone else's light. So just telling everybody what to do moderate or to do vigorous is kind of vague. So there are some general guidelines just to determine what is light, moderate, and high. We don't need to go through every little detail of this. I think the good thing for just general people to know is the talk test to determine light, moderate, and high. So something that would be considered a light exercise, you'd be able to sing while doing it. Moderate, so we're ramping up the intensity a little bit. You'd be able to have a conversation, but you're not able to sing, right? Because you're working at a pace that is requiring you to use your lungs at a capacity that you wouldn't be able to start singing while doing it. Now, as we move on to high or vigorous, our conversation is difficult or broken. So if you think about running a sprint or doing an intense set of squats, right? You're not be able to carry on a conversation while doing that. So that would be considered high intensity. So you can, if you're trying to put the recommendations into action, you can use these kind of as a guideline to figure out where your exercise stands. That will bring us into talking about the forms of exercise, and we do that by starting out talking about resistance training. So resistance training is useful in the prevention of various chronic diseases, so cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, depression, anxiety. Not only is it useful in the prevention of these things, but it's also useful in the management of the same diseases. So if you've been identified as someone with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, engaging in resistance training or strength building activities is helpful in managing those conditions. By engaging in resistance training, we're able to enhance our muscle strength, our muscle size, muscle power, and or our muscular endurance. And what we reap from our resistance training is going to be dictated primarily by the resistance that we choose, how many repetitions we do, and our speed of movement. And just as a general guideline, the higher resistance, if we're training with high resistance and low repetition, we're working primarily on muscular strength. Moderate resistance with a moderate amount of repetition, say 8 to 15, we're working mainly on size. If we're working with high resistance and very fast movements, we're working at power. And if we're working at low resistance with a lot of repetitions, 15 or more, we're focusing mainly on our muscular endurance. Now, those are just really bare bones guidelines or statements, right? And there's always exceptions to those things, and we can train multiple things at once. We saw the recommendation 2 days per week as a minimum. That's for the health of the general population. And how many days you train is really going to be dependent on your goals and training level. And when we talk about training level, we're looking at someone who's a novice or a beginner versus somebody who is trained or advanced. And to get large levels of improvement, a novice could work out 2 days per week and see tremendous benefits. But as somebody becomes more trained and becomes more experienced at resistance training, they're going to require more stimulus to get a benefit. And so usually you can see big benefits in the beginning with 2 days per week, but as you become more advanced, you're having to work in more training sessions and your benefits become smaller and smaller. So here we see bodies are shaped by the activities they perform. We can contrast resistance training with aerobic training. And with aerobic training, the goal is to elevate the heart rate for a prolonged period of time. So examples of aerobic training, they're not resistance training, but jogging, biking, spinning or bicycling, swimming, and so on. Anything that's getting your heart rate up for a prolonged period of time. So engaging in aerobic training enhances the capacity and efficiency of the heart and lungs, right? Our heart is a muscle, and so if we make it work, it's going to increase the strength of it and the efficiency of it. And two things that you guys don't need to know, but they're listed here, are we can improve our cardiac output, so the amount of blood we pump per minute, so we do a better job of pumping blood throughout the body, and also our stroke volume, so the volume of blood that's pumped per week. And these are just examples of increasing the capacity and efficiency of the heart. The lungs are not muscles, but they are expanded by muscles. And one thing we can see an improvement with in our lung function is the VO2 max, and this is just a measure of our gas exchange, the delivery of oxygen and the removal of waste. And as we become more trained or we can engage in more aerobic activity, we're able to deliver more oxygen to our tissues, and we're able to get rid of waste more effectively. So these three things are not things that you really need to know for the purpose of this class, but they're just examples of how we can improve the function of our heart and lungs through aerobic training. So aerobic training is not generally useful for increasing muscle size and strength. It's training mostly the muscular endurance and our cardiorespiratory fitness. So I hope by now you can clearly identify some of the differences between resistance training and aerobic training. So we engage in this physical activity, and how do our muscles adapt? So muscle protein is built up and broken down daily, right? We learned about this when we did our chapter on protein. And physical activity tips the balance in favor of hypertrophy, which is another word for increase in muscle size. So when we did our protein lecture, we looked at nitrogen balance. And so hypertrophy is indicating a positive nitrogen balance, and opposite of that is atrophy, indicating a negative nitrogen balance. And so we can see that performing physical activity, engaging in exercise, tips the favor of our body towards hypertrophy, or presents an opportunity for our bodies to increase our muscle size and strength. So in order to progress with physical activity, it's going to require a balance of activity and rest. And so even though exercising tips the favor in the balance, tips the favor of balance towards positive nitrogen balance, It doesn't mean we can just keep on exercising and gets benefits from it. It needs to be counteracted with periods of rest, so our bodies can recuperate, replenish, recover. That's important for moving forward. So things that you can do to ensure that you're getting that nice balance of activity and rest is working different muscle groups and focusing on main groups. So if you want bigger chest, right, not just doing chest every day and trying only to work your chest by doing something like a chest fly, but stimulating the chest muscles 2 times per week. And instead of just doing the chest fly, doing something like a bench press or push-ups, where you're not just working the chest, but you're working your shoulders and your triceps and your forearms, working on multiple groups at once. So when it comes to this balance of activity and rest, we also need to acknowledge that sleep and nutrition are keys to replenishment and adaptation. So as important it is to do the exercise and tip this balance in the favor of positive nitrogen balance, we need to make sure we seal the deal by ensuring that we have adequate sleep and making sure that our nutrition is where it needs to be. The last point here for discussing how muscles adapt to physical activity would be that muscles respond to the tasks that we perform. So if you want to build bigger biceps, right, you're going to have to at some point engage your biceps in some way. So you're not going to get bigger biceps by only doing running, right, because you're not stimulating that muscle. So kind of similar to this, if we looked at that Olympic powerlifter I talked about, right, if their goal is to increasing their powerlifting performance, going out for runs a couple times a week is probably not going to get the job done. In order to improve their powerlifting performance, they have to engage in powerlifting activities, increasing their power in things like the bench press, the squat, and the deadlift. All three, running is not going to necessarily put them in a good position to improve with those. So specific training or identifying exactly what you need to do is not really essential for achieving peak physical fitness in the general population, right? They need a blend of everything, but it's important for achieving fitness-related goals or training for sports. All right, that will bring us to the 3 energy systems. Now, these energy systems are how our body keeps up with the demand for energy when we engage in exercise. So when we start engaging in exercise, our body's requiring more energy production to keep up with that, and so we have to tap into these different energy systems to make sure that we can support the exercise. And these next 2 or 3 slides is just a segue into seeing how nutrition becomes a part of it. So the energy systems that we have, if you've taken anatomy and physiology, you've probably covered these in much more detail than I will here, but we have the phosphagen system, the anaerobic energy system, and the aerobic energy system. So the phosphagen system, which our book calls the energy reservoir, it provides energy for very short bursts of intense activity. Most textbooks will say up to 10 seconds. Then we have the anaerobic energy system, and this is for high intensity exercise lasting more than a few seconds. So once we exceed the capacity of the phosphagen system with high intensity exercise, we move into the anaerobic energy system. Once the capacity of the aerobic, that's for high intensity exercise. The third one, the aerobic energy system, this is for the moderate intensity activity over a long duration. So once we're engaging in activity that's lasting, say, more than a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and we're continuing to do it, we're starting to tap into our aerobic energy system. And this out of all of them is going to have the highest capacity for engaging in for a long time. So just kind of to give examples, right? If we're doing resistance training, we're going to be tapping in mostly to the phosphagen system and the anaerobic energy system. If we're engaging in aerobic exercise, it's right here, the aerobic energy system. But I will say that similar to the pillars of physical fitness, right, it's usually not working in isolation. So it's oftentimes a combination of the three that is needed to keep up with the demands of an exercise bout. So how does this bring us into nutrition? Well, the type of activity we perform, walking, jogging, lifting, is going to determine the energy system that we use. Are we going to be in the phosphagen system, the anaerobic system, the aerobic system? Now, the energy system that we use, whether it's phosphagen, anaerobic, or aerobic, is going to determine the primary type of fuel we use, whether that's carbohydrate, fat, or protein during exercise. So, which one we tap into, phosphagen, anaerobic, aerobic, is going to determine where we are getting most of our fuel from. Are we pulling on our carbohydrate? Are we pulling on our fat stores? Are we using protein for energy? The one thing that is not listed here is something called creatine phosphate, and that's what we're going to use primarily in the phosphagen system. But just as a general rule of thumb, the anaerobic system pulls primarily from carbohydrate. So when we're in high intensities, we're burning mostly carbohydrate. With the aerobic system, we're pulling predominantly on fat. And protein is not a major contributor to energy production in all kinds of exercise, but there is a small contribution. Now, similar to what I said with these three systems and how it's not usually just one in an exercise bout, but a combination, the same holds true for the fuels as well. So it's not we're only exclusively pulling on carbohydrate or exclusively pulling on fat. It's usually a combination, and that's why we say the primary type of fuel used. Now, this is best explained by the chart that I've pulled into our lecture. So you can see when we're looking at exercise intensity at the bottom, so starting at a very low intensity and moving into high intensity. That's on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we're looking at contribution of total energy. So up here is where we're getting the most energy from, and this is our intensity. So we can see when we're working at a very low intensity, we're pulling primarily on fat for fuel and very little on carbohydrate. But as our exercise intensity ramps up, right, we're walking here maybe, we start jogging, and then we get a nice moderate intensity jog. We're pulling about half and half on fat and carbohydrates. And then as our intensity continues to increase, we become less dependent on fat for fuel and more dependent on carbohydrates. So by the time that we get to very high intensity, think about a pretty intense squat or sprinting, then we're going to be using primarily carbohydrate for fuel, and we're using very little fat for fuel. So this here, using what we've learned in the class so far, can give us a pretty good indication as to why carbohydrates become the main conversation when we talk about fueling for nutrition. And the main reason for this, right, is our body has a limited capacity to store carbohydrates, where we have nearly an endless supply of body fat even when we are lean. So if we're engaging at a moderate to high intensity exercise, which is where a lot of our exercise occurs, we're eventually going to run out of our carbohydrate stores. And so a lot of sports nutrition is about making sure that we have plenty of carbohydrate available to be able to support the activity in this range. So now we will go into a little more detail with carbohydrate and lipid and protein, starting with glucose or carbohydrate, and that's the major fuel for physical activity. So where do we get the glucose from? We get it from our muscle glycogen, right? The stored carbohydrates in our muscles, and our blood glucose. So this supplies the majority of fuel during anaerobic exercise or the high intensity exercise. As muscle uses glucose, right? Our muscle uses the glycogen that's stored in the muscle. It takes it up from the bloodstream. So our muscle uses it, and then we use the glucose in our blood to replace it and continue to support the activity. Now, when this happens, the blood glucose is going to go down, and our body's going to do something to make sure that it goes back up. So what happens is we release liver glycogen, right? We have more glucose stored in our liver, and that's going to help to replenish the glucose taken up and used by the muscles. So the muscles use it, the bloodstream sends it to the muscles, the bloodstream becomes low, and so the liver releases and brings the bloodstream back up so where it can support. Now, the liver glycogen is finite, so at some point, if we end up using all the liver in our muscle, we lower our bloodstream, and then we deplete our liver, we're going to run out. And we call that hitting the wall, is when you eventually run out of fuel to use. And that's why we have glucose replacement. So if you're engaging in exercise where you're using a lot of the glycogen, you're using your blood glucose, eventually you're going to need glucose replacement. And that's where we find things like Gatorade or sports gels. And just as a general rule of thumb, these are necessary for single events lasting more than 1 hour. So most people, if they've consumed enough total calories and enough carbohydrate, they're able to have enough muscle and liver glycogen to support activities for about an hour. Now, the importance or benefits, or importance and knowledge of benefits about carbohydrates for enhancing our performance is not a new thing. And I kept this slide from the textbook. Just right in 1967, they were able to run a test on people and found that those on the high carbohydrate diet were able to last significantly longer in terms of endurance compared to those with less carbohydrates or a high fat diet. So from very early on, the 1960s, we were able to know that carbohydrates were important for fueling exercise. So you can see that for exercise, the amount of glycogen we have and our ability to use it is very important. And so we do have some factors that affect our glycogen availability. The duration and intensity of the activity is going to affect our glycogen availability. So high intensity activity is going to lead to a greater reliance on glucose. And a longer duration activity is going to increase the likelihood that our stores get used. So if we have exercise that is high intensity and it's going on for a long period of time, it's more likely that we're going to use up the glycogen that we have. Glycogen availability is also impacted by our degree of training. So the capacity to store glycogen can be increased. And this means that trained individuals or people who are physically fit are going to start with a larger fuel tank. They're going to have more glycogen on board to support their activity. People who are trained are also going to burn fat at higher intensities. So they're going to use less glucose and less glycogen to perform the same work. And to really exemplify that, we can just go back to this. And what we're saying is that if somebody is trained, right, they're very physically fit, we can basically push this crosshair, or this whole graph to the right. So they're actually using fat at higher intensities, and as a result, they're conserving carbohydrate. The carbohydrate recommendations for athletes, the goal here is to postpone fatigue and maximize performance. And you're going to need abundant carbohydrate throughout the day. So it's not just eating right before, but making sure that you're meeting your total calorie needs and meeting your carbohydrate needs. With that being said, there is special attention that needs to be given surrounding exercise bouts. So there's specific recommendations for a pre-game meal or preparation for the event, and the rule of thumb is 1 to 4 grams per kilogram for 1 to 4 hours out from the event. So if you're 1 hour from the event, you do 1 gram per kilogram, 2 hours out, 2 grams per kilogram, so on and so forth. Carbohydrate intake during exercise, right? Do we need to replace the carbohydrate that we're using? If it's necessary, as we said before, activities lasting more than 1 hour. And then post-game meal or carbohydrate intake after exercise. And this is to replenish glycogen for future events. Most athletes are able to replenish their glycogen and get back to normal levels just by consuming a regular diet afterwards. But if you're an athlete who's engaged in multiple exercise bouts per day, or you're maybe on a team that's doing a tournament and has multiple games, sooner is better. So soon after your exercise bout, you need to start taking in the carbohydrates to start restoring that glycogen. Unlike our DRI that we've learned for carbohydrates, which was 45 to 65% of total calories, requirements for athletes is given in grams per kilogram per day. And this is adjusted to meet the calorie needs and the training type. So we can see what this looks like. So obviously those who are engaging in endurance exercises are going to need more carbohydrates. So we can see as endurance activity ramps up, then we're having a higher range of carbohydrate need. So endurance athletes, team sport competitors, the recommendation is 6 to 10 grams per kilogram per day. Most athletes around 5 to 7. Ultra endurance athletes, these are people who are running beyond marathons, are going to be looking at 8 to 12, with 12 being someone who's on the very high end. So as a athlete or as a practitioner that's giving recommendations for carbohydrates, it's your duty to be able to identify where your athlete or where you are going to fall on this spectrum, and then gearing your carbohydrate recommendations or intake to that number, testing it, and then making adjustments afterwards. So here I just give you some steps for determining specific nutrient needs for the day. So the first thing that you would do would be to determine total calorie needs, and you could use one of the predictive equations that we went over in chapter 9. From there, you're going to pick your carbohydrate and protein requirements in grams per kilogram. And by doing that, you're going to be able to get how many calories from carbs and protein. So you would take the total calories, you would subtract them, you would subtract the calories from carbs and protein to get calories from fat, and then you would divide by 9 to get grams of fat. Now, typically I do this on the board in class just as an example, so you can see how somebody comes up with an energy prescription. I don't have the capability to do that right here and now, but if you'd like to see an example and you're listening to this, please email me. Actually, I'm changing my mind on the fly here. This is going to be your opportunity to earn a bonus point. Let's say 2 bonus points for this lecture if you can follow these steps and give me an exercise prescription. So what I want you to do is I want you to use the Mifflin-St. Jeor predictive equation that we learned in chapter 9. You're going to pick a carbohydrate intake and a protein intake in grams per kilogram using this and what we learn in the remainder of this lecture for protein intake. And then you're going to use the total calories you got in step 1 to subtract the carbohydrates and protein to get calories from fat, and you're going to divide by 9 to get grams of fat. So what I want you to send me is these steps showing your work. And basically what I want to see is the total calories, the grams and calories from carbohydrate, the grams and calories from protein, and the grams and calories from fat. So this is actually a big one. This is going to take a little bit of work from you to get the 2 bonus points. But I'm hoping if you've been listening to these lectures all the way through and been racking up your bonus points, that you'll be willing to do it. So you can go ahead and email this to me whenever you choose to. I'll give you extra time for this. I'll accept them leading up to the final exam. So that was it for carbohydrate. Now we are moving into fat. And fat is another major fuel for physical activity. So one thing about fat is we have an unlimited, or theoretically, source of energy. And so while we're only able to store about 2,000 calories worth of glucose in the form of glycogen, even a lean individual can have approximately 70,000 calories worth of energy stored as fat. So as we learned, fat is very energy dense, right? We can pack a lot of it into a small place. So fat is the primary fuel for aerobic metabolism. Those are our low intensity, long duration activities. The use is affected by the degree of training. So trained muscles use fat more efficiently at higher intensities. This is the same as when I went back to that little graph that we had and I said how we move it to the right, right? People who are trained are able to use fat more efficiently, thereby sparing carbohydrates. Our fat recommendations for athletes are expressed as a percent of total calories, not grams per kilogram like our protein and carbohydrates. And the recommendations for fat are the same as the recommendations for our general population, the AMDR of 20% to 35%. So things you should know about fat. First one is that using fat for fuel is not the same as fat loss. So it is not wise to think that just because we're working at a low intensity and we're burning more calories for fat, that's going to be more effective for burning fat. So the principles of energy balance remain the same. It's all about the total energy and how many calories we're consuming versus how many calories we're putting out. And you can certainly have great results burning fat working at higher intensities than it's actually recommended. The second part with things you should know about fat is that there's no evidence of spot reduction, and this is when it comes to exercise. So we can't choose where we lose the fat, right? If you have a goal of losing stomach fat that you have, doing abdominal crunches may be useful for building the abdominals underneath your belly fat, but it's not going to be a truly effective method for actually getting rid of that fat. And so when we're looking for that flat stomach, doing abdominal crunches is not going to be nearly as effective as doing something like a back squat, where you are burning significantly more calories and engaging much larger muscle groups. The second component of this is how you train will influence where you gain muscle. So we can't choose where we lose fat, but how we train is going to influence how we gain muscle. And so I mentioned this earlier in the lecture, but you must stimulate the muscle you wish to change. And the example I use is with biceps. If you want bigger biceps, you're going to have to do bicep curls or do something that's going to stimulate the biceps. You're not going to be getting bigger biceps by running. This brings us to our final macronutrient, protein. And as I said before, protein is not a major source of energy. We can do some things to make sure that it doesn't become, or there isn't an increase in its use for fuel. So if we have adequate carbohydrate, it's going to spare our protein use, right? Our body doesn't want to use protein for fuel, but it can if it needs to. Our exercise intensity and duration. So if we run out of glycogen, we may use a little bit more from protein to produce energy. And then lastly, our degree of training. So with a higher degree of training, we're going to have less use of protein for energy. Our recommendations for athletes: athletes have a greater need for dietary protein. The need can typically be met by food alone, so supplements have a place for athletes, but they're not a requirement for most. There are people who have a fear of excess protein or a high protein diet for athletes. I think the major concern with this is displacement of nutrients from fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So putting too much of an emphasis on protein and not getting enough of our plant-based foods that are going to have the beneficial micronutrients and carbohydrates that we're going to need to engage in activity. Another concern that's been expressed, or one of the major concerns that's been expressed, is that high protein diets cause damage to the kidneys, and extensive research has shown that in otherwise healthy individuals, high protein diets do not cause kidney damage. So we have recommended protein intakes for athletes. For the general population, we learned 0.8 grams per kilogram. When we look at strength or speed athletes, 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram. And when we look at endurance athletes, 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram. Now, these are the recommendations from our book. I will have you guys have this link available if you're interested in reading about protein needs for increasing muscle size with this paper here. And this is a really well-known paper by Schoenfeld and Aragon from 2018. And they did an extensive review of the literature that's out there and found that to maximize muscle protein synthesis, right? Muscle protein synthesis is going to be the way in which we're building muscle and increasing muscle size. The most recent estimate of needs is 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein per day. So this is going to be for pretty much anyone who's trying to maximize their muscle growth, especially someone who's trying to be a bodybuilder. This would be the recommended amount. Not all athletes are going to fall into this range, right? These still hold true. But for those that are trying to maximize muscle protein synthesis, the recommendation is going to be 1.6 to 2.2 kilograms per kilogram. Once we get beyond 2.2, we're not seeing any additional benefit. So things you should know about protein: muscle building achieved via protein synthesis, right? So that's how we build our muscle, is through protein synthesis. Protein synthesis is signaled by physical activity and accomplished with fuel. So working out puts our body in a position to build muscle, and then we need to finish the job by making sure that we have enough dietary protein available to build that muscle. So the amount of protein synthesis that's signaled is going to be influenced by our exercise intensity and our pattern of muscle contraction. Higher intensity exercise are going to deliver a greater stimulus for protein synthesis. And that signal is going to last for 24 to 48 hours following exercise of sufficient intensity. When it comes to the concept of protein timing, there's no correlation with ultimate gains in muscle volume. So a lot of people think that as soon as they engage in an exercise bout, they need to be drinking protein on their way out the door to make sure that they're getting the most out of their exercise routine. This is not necessarily true, so you can keep your protein shaker at home with you. And when we look at this window of opportunity to capitalize on our muscle protein synthesis, the window of opportunity is going to extend to before the workout. So we're looking at about a 4-hour workout window, whether that's with our exercise bout anywhere within this 4-hour window. The most important thing is that you're meeting your total requirement, and this is best if spread evenly throughout the day in multiple meals and snacks. And then the last point, there's a limit to how much can be used at once. So there's difference amongst individuals, but generally greater than 20 grams. So I believe we did touch upon these things when we did the protein lecture, but they become really relevant for performance nutrition. How about vitamins and minerals? So there's not been any benefit to vitamin and mineral supplements for athletes, unless of course there is a known deficiency that needs to be corrected. So just taking vitamins and minerals for the hope that they're going to do something beneficial is not really played out in research. Athletes tend to need more food than the general population. So more food means more nutrients. There's an right, athletes are going to have slightly increased needs for vitamins and minerals to support their exercise, but that increased demand is met by meeting calorie needs with nutrient-dense foods. You, of course, need to consider supplement timing. Right? The body's use of vitamins and minerals can take hours or days, and nutrients taken just before an event won't help, even if there's deficiency, and this really emphasizes the importance of preparing ahead of time and making sure that you have a game plan leading up to your competition. The goal of any nutrition plan is to prevent deficiencies. Deficiencies impede performance. That will bring us into fluids. So sweat is the body's coolant. It's going to regulate our body temperature, which increases during exercise. With exercise, we're experiencing water losses, which is going to increase our need to replace that water. Those losses occur from breathing and sweating. If we have a negative fluid balance, right, we're losing more water than we're taking in. It can lead to dehydration. Symptoms of dehydration or fatigue, and we see a decline in muscular worth with just a 2% loss in body weight. If we get down to 7%, we see a collapse, and it can be fatal. There's also something called heat stroke. So heat stroke is what occurs in hot, humid weather where the sweat cannot evaporate, and this is a potentially fatal medical emergency as well. And this is something that oftentimes comes into the news around August when people are starting to do football camps in the hot weather. Every couple of years you'll have either a high school player or a college player where there's a death from heat stroke. So fluid and electrolyte needs for physical activity. The goal here is to minimize risk or occurrence of dehydration. And just a fluid loss of 1% to 2% of body weight can impair performance. It's difficult to provide general recommendation, right? How much fluid, how much electrolyte we need is going to be influenced by the environmental conditions. Of course, with extreme temperatures in the cold and very hot and humid temperatures, it's going to increase our need for fluids and electrolytes. Intensity and duration of physical activity. The more intense we're working, the longer we're working out, is going to change our need for fluids and electrolytes. And then each individual is going to have different volumes and rate of sweat. So you and I can engage in the same physical activity bout, but one of us could sweat a lot more than the other. And so this one is going to change our fluid and electrolyte needs. And that's only really determined by personal experience or having somebody who's trained to know how to calculate these things or figure them out. When it comes to fluid and electrolytes, more is not always better, especially in the context of plain water. So if you're someone who loses a ton of sweat in a physical activity bout and you drink only water to replace it, it could lead to something called hyponatremia, and that's beyond the scope of this class and this lecture, although I do think they mention it in your textbook. The last part, thirst is not a reliable indicator of fluid status. So by the time you're thirsty or you feel thirsty, it usually means that you've already undergone a significant fluid loss. So while it's difficult to give specific recommendations, just for general hydration purposes, athletes will see charts like this. So you can see the scale of 1 to 8, how hydrated you are. You kind of just pick out where your urine is, and that will give you a good indication of how hydrated. So you always want to be at a very light yellow to clear. One thing that can be influential in this is if you take high doses of certain vitamins or minerals, it can lead to a neon color. So even if you are well hydrated, then you are going to have a different color. So that's always something that's important to keep your eye on. But there are some guidelines for hydration, right? We have recommended amounts for before an activity, during an activity, and after an activity. For doing before and after is not something necessarily that just your general population athlete or somebody that's doing physical activity is going to be keeping an eye on. But one thing that competitive athletes are recommended to do is to weigh themselves before an activity and after an activity. And the concept here is that any weight that is lost in a single exercise bout is not going to be coming from changes in muscle mass or fat mass. And so we're going to say that that loss is going to become in fluid loss. So by doing that, weighing yourself before and after an activity, you're able to tell, one, how much fluid you should be drinking during the activity, and then also how much you're going to need to replace once you're done to rehydrate yourself. So we can see here, drink greater or equal to 2 cups for each pound of body weight lost during the activity. Now, water is not just important. It's not just important to get the water, but it is important to get the electrolytes. So electrolytes are things like sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, calcium. So when we sweat, there's major sodium losses, but also losing these other electrolytes. When it comes to making sure we have enough, before exercise, we're going to be able to meet our needs by normal intake, making sure we have a well-balanced diet. Replacement during exercise is not generally recommended for exercise less than 1 hour unless the sweat loss is excessive. During prolonged exercise or excessive sweat loss, needs are best met with sports drinks, gels, or salt tablets. Now, when it comes to something like a gel or a tablet, you always want to remember to consume fluid with it. And the recommendation is at least 8 ounces or with that gel or salt tablet. But you always want to look at the specific product and follow the directions on that. So after exercise, getting those electrolytes back in can be met by normal intake unless there are multiple sessions in a day. In that way, you want to start getting them in as soon as possible, similar to the carbohydrate. So selecting sports drinks, this is something that I would often get questions and comments about. So if you're going after a sports drink, right, probably not something you're going to need for general activity, but if you're exercising for more than 1 hour, you're exercising in a very hot climate with a lot of sweat loss, then maybe a sports drink is something that's going to be right for you to make sure that you're safely exercising and maximizing your performance. So when it comes to a sports drink, you want to make sure that it contains carbohydrate and sodium. Those are the 2 most important things. The solution should be 6 to 7% carbohydrate. This is about 14 to 17 grams of glucose or sugar per 8 ounces. A higher percentage will decrease the rate of gastric emptying, impair fluid absorption, and lead to cramping and diarrhea. So this is undesirable. Something that would be a higher percentage would be something like juice. And a combination of glucose and fructose appears to enhance absorption when the load is greater than 60 grams. So greater than 60 grams at one time is something that would be reserved for competitive endurance athletes. So probably not something anyone listening to this lecture is going to need to worry about. But there are techniques for enhancing absorption when somebody needs to take in a lot of carbohydrate at once during an exercise bout. And this just has to do with the way that carbohydrates are absorbed. These are absorbed on different receptor sites in the small intestine. So once you overload the receptor site with glucose and it's backed up, well, if you add fructose in, then it's able to utilize a different receptor site and are able to absorb more at once. Now, when it comes to things like Gatorade, it takes all the thinking out of it because they've already done this for you. They have carbohydrate and sodium. They have the correct solution, and I'm quite confident that Gatorade is using multiple carbohydrates in their mixture to enhance absorption. So I think it's best to stick with the brand name products, the well-known products that are out there. And that concludes our discussion on the multiple areas of performance nutrition. So this is just an overview page, but we've gone through energy, carbohydrate, protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, and fluids. So you can look through this, and it can be useful for studying. Before we end the lecture, we are going to talk a little bit about ergogenic aids. So this includes dietary supplements, but are pretty much any product that's going to claim to enhance performance. Now, there are many products out there on the market, but few work. Most of them, as I said, are dietary supplements. This is not a well-regulated industry, and part of the reason for that is the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, and we've looked at this before. And for the final exam, I want to make sure you know what DSHEA is. This is the act that allows products to be sold in stores or put on shelves prior to undergoing testing for purity, safety, effectiveness, all of those things. We have mostly dietary supplements, but there's also illegal substances like anabolic steroids, which is a very effective ergogenic aid, but it lacks in legality and safety. So we're just going to go through a couple different ergogenic aids. The first one is antioxidant supplements. So when we exercise, we actually lead to increased production of free radicals, which we have learned in this course can contribute to oxidative stress, which is not a good thing. So the claim is if exercise contributes to increased oxidative stress, then we need to take antioxidant supplements to offset that. Well, the research does not support its use, and some research actually suggests that it could be detrimental to our recovery. So this is not something that's recommended. Our antioxidant needs can be met by food alone. The second one here, caffeine. This is one of the ergogenic aids that we can highlight as being possibly effective for improving performance. So caffeine has been shown to be useful for high intensity activities and endurance activities. So whether you're resistance training or participating in a competitive run, it could be useful. The recommendation is for 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, so it lets you figure out exactly what that is. The one thing with caffeine is it's something that you need to try to see how it affects you, because it's going to affect people differently. For some individuals, it's going to lead to GI distress, so give you an upset stomach. For others, it can give anxiety. And this one, impaired sleep at night. So if you're somebody who goes to the gym at night, if it's me giving the recommendations, I'm not going to be asking you to be taking caffeine before you work out, because the benefits that you're going to get from the caffeine, right, to get a better workout, are actually going to hurt you in the long run if you go home and you can't sleep at night. So sleep is going to be more important to building muscle and improving your physical fitness than the benefits that you're going to get from caffeine. So I think caffeine used as an ergogenic aid is much better for somebody who exercises in the morning or maybe around noon. Moving on, we have something called carnitine, and the claim here is that carnitine increases the use of fat for fuel. So carnitine is a compound that helps to get fuel into our muscle to use for energy. Now, research has shown with this supplement that it does not increase muscle carnitine concentration, and for this reason, carnitine is not thought to be beneficial, so it's not one that's recommended. The second one, you can highlight this along with the caffeine. Creatine, this is another one that has been shown rather consistently to be an effective ergogenic aid for people who are engaging in high intensity exercises such as weightlifting or sprinting, but not endurance activities. So creatine increases the capacity to produce energy for intense exercises. So it's not something that is going to lead to tremendous improvements right away, right? It may increase your ability to produce 1 or 2 repetitions at a weight that you're used to doing. But those extra 1 to 2 repetitions over a long period of time is going to be beneficial for your progress. So recommendations for creatine, 5 grams per day is shown to be sufficient to saturate skeletal muscle. If you're going to purchase it, the compound creatine monohydrate is fine. There are a bunch of fancy alternatives out there, but none of them have been shown to be more effective than the original. There are possible side effects with creatine consumption. Most individuals are going to experience weight gain from water retention, and some individuals experience GI distress. The last point is that there appears to be responders and non-responders. And what this means is some people seem to have more benefits of taking creatine than others. The only way to find out, really, I guess, is to try it. But I'm not in the business of making recommendations in this course. The next slide, we have another ergogenic aid, buffers. And so the claim with buffers is that they help to neutralize fatigue-causing acid buildup. So this is actually something that's promising. So things like sodium bicarbonate or beta-alanine can help to delay muscle fatigue and therefore enhance performance. But I would say so far the research is inconclusive. Some of the side effects of taking buffers mostly related to GI, gas, or diarrhea, or is the case with beta-alanine, the feeling of pins and needles. So a tingling feeling from beta-alanine is a common side effect. The second one here, amino acid supplements such as branch chain amino acids or just single amino acid supplements. These are going to claim to promote protein synthesis and act as a fuel source, where the reality is that synthesis is held back by the limiting amino acid. So just taking 1, 2, 3 of the amino acids is not as beneficial as getting all of them in sufficient quantities, right? Because you're only going to be able to produce as much muscle protein as the number of total amino acids that you have. And then also acting as a fuel source, protein contributes little to energy and is an inefficient fuel source. So it's not necessarily beneficial to consume something that's going to enhance your use of protein as a fuel source. Unlike those individual amino acid supplements, we have something called whey protein. This is a protein that comes from cow milk, from milk. It's a milk protein. Now, this is going to contain all of the essential amino acids, so it's not just one, it's going to be all of them. You can buy it as a concentrate or an isolate. So with a concentrate, that means it's going to contain a small amount of milk fat. Isolate is going to be lower in calories and contain no milk fat. And it serves as a convenient, fast digesting option. But there's no clear advantage over other protein foods. So there's nothing to say that whey protein supplement is going to be more beneficial to you than grilled chicken breast. Right? Both are going to deliver a high amount of amino acids in an appropriate blend of the ones that you need. So whey protein, I would say, is a useful ergogenic aid. Then, right, those are the ones that we're going to cover in a little bit of detail, but outside of that, there's hundreds and hundreds of ergogenic aids, dietary supplements that are claimed to enhance performance. And you can go through these and find one that you may like or have heard of before. But all the ones listed here, with the exception of this sodium bicarbonate, are not really been shown to be effective for improving performance. So you can go through this on your own time. There's nothing really specific on here that you will need to know for an exam in this course. All right, well, that is the end of our lecture today. I thank you all for tuning in and listening to the show. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post it on our forum or email me in private.